Deck building is one of my favorite things about the One Piece card game, as it allows you to play the game exactly how you want, cooking up a strategy and playstyle that works best for you. But this can also be a very difficult process to understand, as the answer to many questions you may have is going to be, it depends. But don't worry, as today I'm going to break down a complete guide to deck building and go over everything you need to know to create the ideal deck for any leader. Let's get started. Now, every deck in the One Piece card game is made up of a combination of offense, defense, and control. To start, offense is focused around attacking, but includes anything that threatens your opponent's life. This is important as unless you're playing Nami, you're going to need to take down your opponent's life to 0 in order to win the game. Offensive abilities would be cards with Rush, as they can attack the same turn they are played, in addition to when attacking effects, as these only activate when you target your opponent with an attack. And will also include any card or effect that reduces your opponent's life. And even if they don't have an offensive ability, any card with 5k power or higher has some sort of offensive pressure, as most leaders have 5k power as well, and this means you can threaten a life without any Dawn investment when you attack. Defense is of course the opposite to offense, and these cards are focused around protecting your life. Defense is broken into two main categories, which are counters and blockers. Each deck will usually have a combination of both, as they both come with pros and cons. Counters from your hand cannot be cancelled out by your opponent, which means they're guaranteed to work whenever you activate them. That being said, they only provide a 1 to 2k power boost, so if your opponent swings a large attack, you're going to have to discard a lot of cards in order to prevent it. This means that counters are best used when you're either receiving an attack that's equal to your leader's power or 1k above, as you only need to discard one card to stop it. We also have event counters, which some decks include, but usually only in the 0 to 2 cost range, as anything higher and you're using up too many resources on defense. On the other hand, blockers can stop any attack, no matter the power. In addition, if your blocker's power is higher than your opponent's attacker, they'll survive and you can use them again next turn. However, you have to spend Dawn to get them on the field, and since they are out there, they're weak against any removal effects that rest cards, KO them, or send them back to your hand. Since defense is revolved around protection, anything that makes your leader more difficult to attack, or stop an opponent's attack from being successful, falls into this category. And finally, we have control and utility. Field control is all about increasing your board presence or disrupting your opponents. Card effects that KO characters, send them back to their hand, or stop them from refreshing are all examples of control cards. And while they are not disrupting your opponent, I include cards that allow you to chain up multiple characters into this category, as they are giving you more options to work with as you battle for control of the board. Utility cards, while slightly less exciting, are a crucial component that adds consistency to your deck. These cards allow you to either draw cards, search your deck and add a card to your hand, or rearrange the top of your deck in order to find the cards you're looking for. And now that we have the core concepts out of the way, what actually goes into your deck? Every deck is going to consist of a combination of 2k counters, low cost characters, mid cost characters, high cost characters, and events. But the actual breakdown of each is going to depend on you. The best way to think about your deck is like a new character in a game. You have a set number of skill points, or cards, and you're going to allocate them into different skill trees depending on what you're looking for. And if you're not sure what you're looking for, a good strategy to start with is 10 2k counters, 30 to 35 characters of an even combo of low cost, mid cost, and high cost, and then 5 to 10 event cards. Oh, and within your characters, you're going to want about 5 to 10 blockers as well. But that's enough about theory. Let's start deck building right now. Step number 1 is picking your leader. This is the most important card in your deck, as your entire strategy should be based around cards that have strong synergies and work together with your leader. And if you're not sure which leader or color you want to play, I do have some videos out on this, but for now, let's assume that you already have your leader chosen. This is where I'm going to recommend our first resource, which is LimitlessTCG. On here, you can filter for leaders in decks and see what cards are most commonly being used with that leader. As an example, if you were building a Shanks deck, you could click here to see some of the core cards, or click into the detailed card breakdown to show an exact list of every card being used. Now, just because a card is on here does not mean you need to include it, but this is a great starting point for you to look at some of the other cards that players are having success with and build it in the way that you want. As you can see, it takes the average from all the decks, in this case 20 different deck lists, and while you can't play 3.8 Otama, this gives you the idea that most players are running 4 copies of her. And especially if you're new to this leader, there's nothing wrong with borrowing the majority of these cards and using it as a starting point to start trying out this leader. So if we do that, our starting deck looks like this. And right away you'll notice that this deck is highly weighted towards high cost characters while having very few low cost. This will also be where you start to make your first few adjustments. Perhaps you feel like this deck is too highly weighted in high cost characters, so you remove a few and add in a few 3 to 4 cost characters who have rush. Or perhaps you think 13 counters is too many and you remove a few and increase the amount of utas and building snakes that you run. It's also at this time, when you have the core of your deck in front of you, that you want to start thinking about your Dawn curve. This means either when going first or going second, you want a card to play on your 1 through 10 Dawn turns. And if you think about a card that you really want to play every single time at a certain Dawn curve, well, then you're probably going to want to include either 3 to 4 copies of this card so you find it as often as you want to. For cards that are more situational, they might help you against certain leaders, or you only want to see about 1 a game, or perhaps cards that provide a win condition, you're going to want to include 1 to 2 copies. Now, one of the risks of just using the average number of cards included is this can provide some misleading information. As an example, let's look at Marco. It looks like on average, players are including 1 copy in the deck. But in reality, only about 1/3 of players are actually running Marco, but the thing is that players that do are running about 3 copies of him. So from this list, it looks like you should just add 1 to your deck, but in reality, you should either not run him at all or run 2 to 3 copies. And so to get a better idea of what each player is doing, we can actually go back and scroll down, and it's going to show us a detailed breakdown of every deck that's being included in this average. And so from doing your own research, looking at the average cards other players are using, as well as looking at a few specific deck lists, you should be in a great position to have your starting deck. But of course, there's no such thing as too much research, so our second resource is called One Piece Top Decks. One of the key differences, and a nice bonus, is they provide deck lists for both Japan and the English format, so if you're interested in a new leader, you'll be able to find some deck lists for them right there. For the sake of argument, let's say we're looking at the English format, an OP09, we're going to click on that, it's going to show us all the most recent well-performing deck lists. And at the top, we can select deck profile and search for the leader that we're looking for. Just like before, we're going to continue with our Shanks theme. And once we select it, there's a bunch more decks that we can look into. You also notice on the right columns, it shows the tournament and their placement. And as an example, there's a top 16 from nationals. So let's click on that and see what cards they used. And again, you don't need to copy exactly what they're doing. This is just another resource I want you aware about if you want to look to see what other players are doing. And while you can lean on these resources, don't be afraid to experiment with a card that no one else is including. Search through all the characters, events, and stages of your leader and see if there's anything unique that you want to add. My second tip is not to overthink your first 51 cards, as this is not the end of your deck building, but rather the beginning. The true deck building begins once you start testing out this leader and deck and figuring out what you're missing and what adjustments need to be made. Is there a specific leader that you just keep on losing to? Perhaps there's a card that you can add that is going to improve your matchup against them. Is there a card that you're consistently drawing and not playing just because you have some better options? Perhaps you need to either swap that card out or include less copies as it's only useful in certain matchups. And finally, as you're playing throughout many different leaders, get an overall feel of what your deck is missing. Is it early game pressure? Perhaps not enough blockers? What is it that's going to take your deck to the next level? And finally, what would we do if the leader you chose has a very low play rate and you can't find any public information on useful cards or any deck profiles? How would we go about building a deck completely by ourselves? We would start with the general guideline, looking for about 10 of each type of card, but remembering we do have some flexibility depending on what we find. From here, we're looking for the core cards of our deck, and I think there are 2 best ways to go about this. The first is finding any cards in these categories that are also the same type as your leader, providing some consistency throughout your deck. If I wanted to build a smoker deck, I want to first take a look at all the different types of navy cards and figure out which ones I want to add it. The next is to look at other competitive leaders within your same color and see what are the best cards they are using to see if some of them might be applicable to your deck as well. Once you're aware of all the best cards you can use, you want to start working towards your dawn curve and figuring out the core cards and strategy of your deck. And once that's complete and you have the meat and potatoes of your deck, you're looking for some accompanied cards that are going to help you in areas that you might be missing. Do you have enough blockers? Do you have enough counters? Perhaps not enough high-powered characters? Look for what your deck is missing and try to make it as balanced as possible. And finally, the most important step is of course to get out there and start testing it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you found it helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments down below. I'll catch you next time.